It can be pretty tempting to do multiple things at the same time. In some situations, it can actually work, and that's where multitasking can be effective. But in many other situations, it's detrimental, and monotasking, or doing one thing at a time, is more effective. Let's start by discussing the different types of multitasking. I've divided up into mental multitasking. For example, let's say you're in a work meeting and you're not really fully listening, you're writing an email at the same time. I've definitely been guilty of that. That's mental multitasking. Then there's mechanical multitasking, where, for example, there's a work meeting and I'm listening, but I'm out for a walk or I'm cooking my lunch. And that is actually, in some cases, pretty good. I can actually sometimes listen better in that way because I've got busy hands, quiet mind, and I'm able to more fully absorb what's happening. Doesn't always work. I mean, if it's subject matter that I would need to look at on the screen, definitely not going to help. But there can be situations where mechanical multitasking works. But mental multitasking, I would argue, never works. I've tried it many times, and the result is that, let's say I'm listening to a podcast while I'm writing an email, the words from the podcast will end up in the email by accident, or it'll just take me a lot longer. So I don't really recommend that approach, but I do think mechanical multitasking can be okay, especially if you're like me and you've got ADHD and it's pretty hard to just sit still while a meeting, which is not super stimulating, is held. Overall, I think when multitasking can work is when you've got one activity that uses your hands or your body, but doesn't really require much thinking. You know how to do it, you've done it many times before. Whereas the other activity, it uses your brain, but it's also not super challenging. So for example, let's say we've got some activities here on the left and the right. Driving while going for a walk. Let's think about whether that can work. Driving while listening to a work meeting. Doing a workout while you are having a camera on meeting. So we'll go through it. Driving while going for a walk just isn't going to work. That's logistically infeasible. The reason is because both activities need your body. Driving while listening to a high-stakes work meeting where you might get emotional or you're trying to talk a lot, probably not a good idea, but maybe a low-stakes meeting where you're just listening and you don't really have to talk, that could actually be okay. Doing a workout while you're in a camera-on meeting, probably, depending on the workplace, that might be okay in some settings, but definitely where I work, that would probably be frowned upon. However, often I don't need to have my camera on, and doing a workout while I'm listening to a meeting where I'm not heavily involved and it's just me being a contact sponge, I find that okay for me. I can actually listen pretty well, and I'm actually going to absorb more than if I try and listen in front of my computer, because I'll just be tempted to go and check my emails and I won't really take it in. Another example, cooking lunch while writing an email. I don't have enough hands to make that work. Eating lunch while writing an email, I mean, it kind of works, but we've talked about in previous lessons in this course the idea of activating the diffuse mode network, and by sacrificing that time, which could be a break, to be constantly working, probably not ideal. And then there might be situations where the work is pretty mundane. Let's say you're categorizing transactions in a financial report. Doesn't require much mental horsepower. I sometimes will listen to a podcast while I'm doing that, and it does work. I do think I'm a bit slower and I might make minor mistakes, but if it's a low stake situation, it's probably okay. I'm more likely to actually complete the task if I've got some additional stimulation. That's just me with my brain. I don't think everyone should do it that way. And it may also be a sign that if it's so boring, maybe I should actually be automating it or delegating it. Overall, I think the phrase busy hands, quiet mind is applicable for me. I don't know about you. You might find that it never works, that multitasking, even mechanical multitasking, isn't good for you. But it might work. It might be worth a try if the task is super dull and you just can't bring yourself to do it any other way. However, mental multitasking, for example, if you are writing an email and you're watching a YouTube video, I don't think that works, nor do I think it works if you are, say, watching a YouTube video and listening to an unrelated podcast. Not so good. So multitask wisely, use it in the way that it's going to be effective.